Can everyone hear me? Well, that's a comfort because I don't think I've ever had anybody say that they weren't able to hear me before, so everything is just kind of constant. Good afternoon. Wow, love this crowd, and of course it gratifies us with each and every tour that we conduct. On behalf of the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, which is one of 8 agencies of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, I'm Revis Edmonds. I'm the Preservation Outreach Coordinator, and I would like to welcome you to our 3rd Sandwiching in History Tour of 2017 in this amazing facility that we know on the books as the old Central Fire Station of North Little Rock. But at the same time, it has such a further richer significance for this community. And I would first like to thank Sandra Taylor Smith, the director of this lovely place, and the director of the North Little Rock History Commission for all of her help and partnership in helping bring this tour to fruition. And she has some of her commission members and staff members she would like to recognize very briefly.
Yeah, my commission chairman Suzanne Jackson, somewhere here, co-worker Carrie Bradburn, Monty Bradburn, Kelly Peters, Commissioner Crystal Clark, and we have a historic district commissioner, Charlie Hart, here. And I also wanted to introduce Mr. Carl Krebs in the red chair. He is the one who came to us with the design for the tree.
And of course, obviously, is what the first thing that struck me the minute I walked in this building for the first time about 3 weeks ago. But also, we'd like to point out a couple of other things. First, I've been asked to put in a plug, and I do that well. I used to be in sales. And the book On the Opposite Shore, The Making of North Little Rock, written by Carrie Bradburn, is available in the gift shop, and for the incredible price of $15. Now, how can you get such a rich history at such a great price? And you will enjoy it. I know you will. We have a copy of it at AHPP that I used as part of my research. And, you know, pick you up a copy before you leave. You'll be glad you did. Okay. Now, and one other thing I'd like to point out, would Mr. Bob Franklin be in the group today?
Right behind you.
Mr. Franklin. Pleasure, sir. Mr. Franklin wrote the National Register nomination for the North Little Rock Central Fire Station that put this building in the 1970s on the National Register of Historic Places. And everybody give Mr. Franklin a round of applause. Because you can basically say this was the gentleman that got this ball rolling, okay? So let's take a look at this amazing piece of North Little Rock's history. And one other thing I need to add is the tour is worth 1 hour of HSW continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects. Talk to me after the tour if you're interested, and I'll make sure you get your credit. Okay. The Old Central Fire Station is part of the Argenta Historic District, which encompasses significant historic elements of central North Little Rock. The area was known as Argenta when it was first settled around 1866 and remained unincorporated until it was annexed to Little Rock in 1890. William Fawcett, a leading Argenta politician and businessman who became this city's first mayor, orchestrated the incorporation of North Little Rock just beyond the annexed area in 1901 and made a successful petition to separate Argenta from Little Rock into the new municipality in 1904. And all that eventually, because of one dispute after another, had to be settled through the courts. The district first consisted of two discontiguous areas, one commercial and the other residential. The commercial section consists of a 3-block stretch of Main Street between Broadway and 6th. 3 blocks west of this area is the residential area, which is centered on a stretch of Willow Street from 4th to Melrose Circle, that also includes properties on adjoining blocks of cross streets in between. The district was first listed on the National Register on March 15, 1993, and the North Little Rock City Council passed an ordinance under the Arkansas Historic Districts Act. This ordinance created the North Little Rock Historic District Commission and placed the Argenta Historic District under the protection of the Historic District Commission. In 2002, the district's boundaries were amended to change the status of 5 buildings to contributing status, and they had undergone the appropriate restoration work. Finally, in 2007, the district was amended to include the areas between the 2 original parts of the district. This was because in 1993, the boundaries had to be skirted as to get 51% contributing. By 2007, because so many properties had been renovated, the district was able to take in the rest with an amazing 81% of the buildings as contributing properties. That is simply outstanding. And it goes to a lot of hard work by Sandra and many of her associates, and literally the good work done by this community. Now, the fire station we stand in is a 2-story brick and wood building with a 3-bay front facade dominated by a large equipment bay on the ground floor, which is now enclosed by these glass doors. It's constructed in Art Deco style and cast concrete, and was believed to have been designed by the renowned Arkansas architect Charles Thompson, who was also responsible for many of the Victorian-era homes in Little Rock's Quapaw Quarter. The building was built by the city of Little Rock originally in 1895 in what was then called, this was 501 Newton Street at the time, which eventually became Main Street. And it served as fire station number 6 for Argenta on the north side of the Arkansas River, which had been annexed in 1890 as Little Rock's 8th Ward. This was initially little more than a stable for horses hitched to firefighting wagons, with upstairs sleeping quarters. Could not have been very comfortable, for sure. This building was expanded and renovated after Argenta broke away from Little Rock in 1904 and merged with North Little Rock, which had been formed in 1901 from lands north of 15th Street, which we now know today as Curtis Sykes Drive. Now, the city got control of its boundaries, but initially little else, because when they got control of its boundaries, that particular year's tax revenue went south of the river. So you had a city, but no money. So you had to find some way to replace that $20,000 that went south of the river. So in 1903, that tax revenue in 1903 had to be replaced by borrowing. So that amount of money was borrowed, and part of it was used to expand the firehouse, adding another floor to house city offices, which would, until several years later, would be the original North Little Rock City Hall, and then would purchase an 850-pound bell for the belfry to serve as both the fire and police alarms. This was cast by the Buckeye Bell Foundry in Cincinnati. It was eventually moved to Owens Funeral Home, and finally to the gazebo in Fawcett Park between the 2 Main Street bridges. When the city offices were added, North Little Rock returned the 2 fire horses. You know, lost all that tax revenue, we're going to still return the horses. The 2 fire horses named Dick and Doc. That almost sounds like Leo McLaughlin's Scotch and Soda over in Hot Springs. As new horses were selected for the city's new fire wagons. Yeah, that's the way to get that back in Little Rock, just giving back the old wore-out horses. Okay. Okay, so after pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I heard something. Shortly after North Little Rock's incorporation, the building initially housed city offices, the jail, and the fire station, and eventually served, like I said, as the first city hall. In 1915, the city offices were moved to the current city hall down the street at Main and Broadway, and in 1923, the building's original 2 equipment bays were converted into 1. Now, the area upstairs where the jail had been located in the building, which is in the back, was repurposed as a workshop for the fire department. The horse stalls were located under the stairway, which was in the middle of the this downstairs area, and the horse stalls were removed shortly thereafterwards. Near that time, what was thought to be North Little Rock's first traffic signal was installed right out in front of the firehouse. Now, of course, why would you need a traffic signal at that time? Well, because you only needed a 2-way red light in order to stop traffic when the fire bell rang. So, about 1923, as part of the need to accommodate larger vehicles, since we were using now using motorized fire vehicles, the front doors were enlarged to the present day width. When the city offices vacated the building, the courtroom upstairs became a classroom for increased training for firefighters and for police officers. And the other officers, where the workroom is and where Sandra's office is, were used by the fire chief, and they were living quarters by the firemen on duty. You had 2 poles that descended from the upper floor down to the engine room where we're at right now, and they have been preserved, and they are a part of the current structure. And even though the openings have been well preserved, in spite of the previous deterioration when the building was abandoned, they have been closed off, if you'll notice, by thick plexiglass. So I don't get to wow you by going down the fire pole today. I know you're all disappointed. So, okay. All right. In 1925, a fire damaged the back rooms and the kitchen. And after the repairs were made, there were no major changes in the structure for the remainder of its use as a fire station, save for periodic paint jobs and a facelift in 1934, which was the final widening of the front bay to accommodate wider and longer fire trucks. Basically, folks, if they had gotten any wider, you couldn't have put them in the building. So, eventually, outside of the 2 trucks that could be put here in the station, any others had to be parked in the alley behind the building. Now, that had to have been what we would call today a hot mess. Okay? And it gets worse. It created an unintended space issue. Eventually, outside the 2 trucks inside the station, outside of being able to be parked in the alley, an article in the Arkansas Gazette in 1949 gave a lot more detail to the situation here. Quote, the narrow building barely houses 3 trucks, one behind the other, so that the 2 back trucks cannot get out unless the first is moved. Another truck is kept out in the open in a nearby lumber yard. Chief Caldwell's car and those of the other firemen are stored in a funeral home parking lot, which was Owens Funeral Home. And Sandra, where was Owens Funeral?
Next door.
Next door, okay.
Yeah.
All right. They must be moved elsewhere whenever a funeral is being held. Now that, I told you it got better. The location of the chief's car also prevents a fast departure from the scene of a fire, because apparently it was blocked in by the funeral home hearses. Now, after World War II, the antiquated condition of this building had become manifest. I mean, it was even worse than serious by that time. The ceiling fell in May of 1957, narrowly missing a fireman who was sleeping below, probably just back towards the back to our right, to my right. And because of incidents like this, the fire inspector condemned this building as unsafe in 1958. Now that's just really something, to have the fire station condemned by the fire inspector. Oh, and you know, we laugh about it today, but you mean literally, with North Little Rock growing like it was in the 1950s, I mean, after all, Casey Lehman promised the people here, quote, "I'll build you a city." Well, that city needed a fire station, and this one was falling apart. So by 1960, this structure, which was 22 feet wide and 130 feet long, some of our houses are larger than that, was said to not have 1 foot of ground outside the building that could be used for washing the trucks and the hoses. That duty literally had to be done out on the side of the street or on the sidewalk. The trucks had to be parked end to end again in the building, making it increasingly difficult to get out the needed trucks during emergencies, and you know how response time affects fire insurance rates. Another constant issue was the need to control vermin around the firehouse due to its proximity to a feed mill that was behind the building. And I think some of the remnants of it are still back here. So ironically, even in spite of all of this mess, the city fathers still on top of that had to deal with the vestiges of the earlier dispute with Little Rock over Argenta's status where the fire station was concerned. When the city got ready to relocate the fire station and start to negotiate the sale of this property, they discovered that while the city of North Little Rock owned the building, the land under it still legally belonged to the city of Little Rock. Oh yeah, and of course, you had to know that the Little Rock City Council had to be doing a little bit of snickering at that point in time. But the discrepancy, in fact, they had owned the land under the fire station since December the 13th, 1894. And how was this discovered? Well, when the city was in process of selling the building, or selling the property, it was discovered that records in the city clerk's office showed that the Little Rock City Council in 1928 authorized the mayor to give North Little Rock the deed to the land. The trouble was there was no record in there that showed that the deed was actually handed over. So when it was discovered, after a little bit of time, the quitclaim deed was rushed over to the Pulaski County Circuit Clerk's office, and it was recorded, upon which the sale of the property was finalized. What we do know, a lot of what we know about the history of the firehouse is also contained in a scrapbook that was kept by the city clerk beginning in 1938. Now, after being vacated by the fire department in 1962, the building served as several private businesses, including Twin City Glass and Upholstery and Massery's Cleaners. The building, again, thanks to Mr. Franklin, was placed on the National Register on December the 22nd, 1977, but many years went by before improvements were made. By the late 1980s, the building was abandoned and fell into disrepair. Real estate developer Gene Pfeiffer purchased the building in 1990 and intended to demolish it. Its condition, though, went from bad to worse, with timbers from the upper floors continuing to collapse and coated by a thick layer of pigeon droppings. Yeah. Making the building not just a safety hazard, but a health hazard for all of the businesses surrounding it. In 2000, several parties, including a well-known restaurant developer out of Conway, expressed serious interest in restoring this building to a dining establishment and a residential loft development, but it never came to fruition. So in 2003, the North Little Rock History Commission and the Historic District Commission acquired this building with the intent of using the top floor as the Historic District Commission's offices and historic archives, and the bottom floor as a new branch of the William F. Lehman Public Library. According to architect Gary Clements, the building had to be gutted to the bare walls, and steel joists had to replace the rotted wooden ones. And the former fireman's bunkhouse is the archives workroom, while the former office of the fire chief is occupied by Sandra Taylor Smith. Now, when you enter this particular part of the building, on the other side of the counter, you need to notice there is a stuffed monkey over there on the stool. Well, there's a story behind that monkey. And that, of course, is Punchy the Firehouse Monkey. As the Arkansas Gazette reported on November the 20th, 1895, the fireman, quote, had a curiosity in the firehouse in the person of a monkey, which was brought back to Central America by the, quote, boys who came back. Now, as best as I could ascertain, when we talk about the boys, they were likely, they may have been National Guardsmen or militiamen that were called up to active duty during some of the military interventions that were going on at that time in Central America, particularly in Colombia and Venezuela. We sent troops down there during 1895. And they could have probably brought the monkey back in that part of the world. Does that make any sense to you, Sandra? Okay. All right. It's the closest thing I could get. Okay. All right. So apparently, around the firehouse, Punchy was the star. I mean, he was just the life. He was the life along what was otherwise a pretty dreary existence. And he was talked about in another Gazette article in August 1896, in which it talked about Punchy's return to the firehouse after a brief sojourn in Clarksville. Now, Punchy became a world traveler. So he's such a part of the firehouse lore that, again, the handmade doll that's located on the stool honors his contribution to the quality of life that existed along the firehouse at that time. Now, this downstairs portion would house the William F. Lehman Library's Argenta branch from 2006 to 2014, when it moved to its current location in the old post office building on Main Street. When the library was located here, the back portion, way back there where many of you were at before we started, that had been the fireman's workshop, was reborn as the library's children's center. This level now houses the amazing exhibits here that you'll see today, which draw much on North Little Rock's rich heritage as a railroad town. So much of this city would have not been where it is without the railroad, as so many cities in Arkansas can attest to. Particularly noted is the railroad-themed tree, which it was the Christmas tree. It looks like it's now the St. Patty's Day tree, thanks to Sandra. And right here facing the old firehouse doors that were originally faced as a Christmas time addition, but yet I think you'll agree it adds to the charm and atmosphere of this facility. I don't think anybody would argue without that. So one other notable exhibit I'd like to point out, and it's down, I believe, on the other end. It is a framed copy of another newspaper that existed at that time called the North Little Rock News Sentinel, that was dated February 6, 1904, with the big headline, "Argenta Last Secures Her Freedom." Now, it almost sounds like the end of a Revolutionary War or something. But at the same time, it really attested itself to really the emotional effect that at that time, the effort for North Little Rock to gain her own identity had on its citizens. And it commemorated the Arkansas Supreme Court decision that did allow Argenta to break with her capital neighbor and unite with North Little Rock, and then pass through the odyssey of identity, if you will, that has culminated in the rebirth of this amazing piece of our history and the modern renaissance that is now going on, not just here in the Argenta district, but throughout North Little Rock. They don't call it Dogtown anymore. And I would question somebody who would do so. Okay, guys, thank you all for coming today. Sandra, where's the open areas?
We're gonna go, you're welcome to go upstairs, you go up right, that door to the right there, and you walk right upstairs, and we'll let you see some of the archives, and then you can come back down the steps. And we do have a lift, if anyone wants to go up the stairs, we can.
Okay? One other thing, please join us, number one, for our next Sandwiching in History tour on Friday, April the 7th at the Dimmerl House at 1400 Spring Street in Little Rock, and we'll begin like this at noon. Also, if you're interested in a road trip, next Saturday, come join us in Jonesboro. For the first Walk Through History Tour of 2017, we will start at 1112 South Main downtown in what is the Frierson House, which was once the home of Governor Francis Cherry. And we will begin there at 11 a.m. Hope to see you there and all of our future tours this year. And one other reminder, if you're dining out after the tour, be sure to patronize the locally owned restaurants who will really appreciate your business. You'll love the taste and you're going to build a better North Little Rock. Thanks all.